That was a very nice introduction. And you're right, it's a scary title, and I should tell you it's a scary presentation. There are many offensive images and words in this presentation because this is what I need to bring to bear to talk about. But if it's bothersome for you, there will be some very offensive racial terms and ethnic terms and so forth. And so please tune out if this is a problem for you. The connection I need to make for you before I get started, really, the connection to attention is that it's a bit different. Well, I'll be talking about social attention, attention to a person. Well, it's attention to me. I want you to pay attention to me because I love attention, and many of us do. But I will try to argue for you that people produce texts in order to draw attention to themselves. And I think this is a lot of what is happening in social media for various reasons. I can't go into all those reasons, but I think this is maybe a connection. And now the last thing before I start is, can I please get a thumbs up from everybody for those brave Ukrainians who are defending? I'm getting lots of. If you can't see the crowd, everyone's thumb is almost everyone's thumb is up. Lots of them. Some have 2 thumbs up, except for Zelensky, of course, who is a bad guy. Can I get a thumbs down for this?
You get 1 finger up.
You give me giving a different finger up, not a thumb. Yeah, Zelensky, he's a bad guy. He's a Satan worshiper and a Jew, and you know, he says good things, but he's a bad guy. I say this, and I'm not getting a whole lot of thumbs up here. But if I said this elsewhere, I know I could get a whole bunch of thumbs up. Wendy Rogers says this on Twitter, and she's getting 3,751 likes for associating Zelensky with conspiring Jews and with the Clintons. And so this may not be the audience to get those thumbs up, but it's out there, and it's not hard to find. So I want to talk to you about online hate, online lies, and social media today, and put it in a scary context in arguing that people do this for love. So in terms of talking about online hate, I'm talking about racism, misogyny, insults and attacks based on gender and sexual orientation, harassment and bullying, although Professor Marwick is following me and I have a lot to learn from her about harassment and some really nice theoretical and empirical work that she's done. We can include doxing also. This is quite a range of different behaviors, but I will argue that they have many things in common. So this is the range of topics one might explore as online hate. A lot of previous research into online hate and cyberbullying and so forth takes a perspective of looking at individual characteristics. It is often assumed that people engage in these behaviors in order to antagonize a victim. And I'm going to take a different perspective. But from that perspective, people assume that there are individual differences and pathologies, or they take a social psychological perspective and talk about this as polarization or as in-group, out-group dynamics. And I think there is some of the latter, but I think it's more than that. I'll argue a different perspective for you, an alternative perspective, that people engage in online hate in order to garner social reward. In other words, to gain attention, to turn attention on themselves, and to get praise from other people. In that perverted respect, online hate is a pro-social behavior because people are doing it to garner interpersonal and social reward. And that's where we'll be going with this. So this is a terrible slide that has too much stuff on it. This is an overview of some points I'd like to try to make with you today. The 3 major arguments I'm trying to develop. First, that the motivations and gratifications for online hate are social in nature, that hate expressions beget social approval and reinforcement. It provides the basis for relationships. It motivates greater involvement. And this has to do with in-group, out-group identification. But because it's the internet, you know, you're not just posting, you're interacting with each other, you're making friends over time. And this provides a different level of gratification than simple social identification. Following from that, it seems to make sense, and we can find anecdotal evidence that hate is socially organized, that it is collaboratively planned, it's executed, followed by reciprocation, and then congratulations. So this is a phasic activity, which research has identified as fun. And I'll explain what that argument is about if we get to it. And finally, if we have time, this goes into some psychological effects of online hate, that online hate, in terms of its expression and its reinforcement by others, has the very strong potential to change self-perception and attitudes. And I'll say more about that later. But the bottom line would be that I'm looking at online hate as performative, and in that respect, online hate as a pro-social activity to get rewards. When we look at the range of online hate behaviors, we can see that some seem to be very expressive. It's stated for a general readership, although some is direct, seems to be addressed to a specific victim. So on Twitter, if you put an @ sign in somebody's handle, it looks like it's directed to an individual. And I would argue across the spectrum, it's quite possible that all these behaviors are still done in order to garner the approval of one's in-group. So I'm going to give some examples today, and I hope they're not too drag it down too much. But stormfront.org, it's a website. It is an interactive website. It's one of the oldest hate sites online, and it's for white supremacists and neo-Nazis generally. But you know, they tell you right up front, there's a discussion board on it, huge discussion board on it, and people are welcome there to build a community of white activists working for the survival of our people. It says, this is not a space where minorities go, you know. So when we think about online hate and we conventionally think of it as to antagonize people, no one goes to stormfront.org who would be antagonized. It's for its own community of white supremacists. This is just a tip of the iceberg of one anecdote suggesting that this is people garnering support and praise for one another. And you know, it's in groups like this we see these memes. This could have been a meme from 1937, but it was posted just last week actually in Gab. So about the Zionist Jews. But I think the caricature cartoons are probably, you know, decades old. So as I said, the first part of this 3-argument level is that people engage in online hate. Their motivation is to gain social approval. This begins with in-group, out-group identification and moves to interpersonal relationships and making friends. And the anecdotal evidence for this, that it's an in-group phenomenon, is the slang and symbols that tend to pervade at least a lot of the white supremacist sites. You know, it looks like out-group antagonism, but it's so highly encoded that it can really only be in-group symbology. So the ADL compiles and publishes a list. And so, you know, many people find it surprising. I found it surprising that the number 14 is a code. If you see it in somebody's username or you see it in their signature file, and it's a code that is shorthand for the 14 words: we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. If you see 14 in one of these sites, this is what it means. If you see 88, that has a hidden meaning also. 8 is the eight for the 8th letter of the alphabet, which is H. 88 is HH, which is Heil Hitler. WPWW is white power worldwide. You see this often in some of these sites. And you see sometimes people's names or other terms with multiple parentheses around them, called the echo. This is shorthand for indicating that somebody or some rule is a Jew. Each of these symbols is searchable too. So if you want to join a conversation or pile on, you can see where these symbols came up. And Pepe the Frog, of course, is cute, beloved by children, racist meme that we see in a lot of places. So, I mean, this is very expressive hate, though. This is talking about the Jews, this is talking about other minorities and so forth. But it gets, you know, it gets more particular than that. So here's an individual that's being named. Now, no one is suggesting that you do anything to Dana Nessel, but you see a lot of things said about her, that she's a dirty Jew and a dyke on top of it. Let's keep our eyes on who the Jewish traitors are when the guillotines are rolled out and so forth. This is from November 2020. You know, that was a tough time in this country politically, and of course it got nasty. And what seems to happen is when people try to make this better and tech companies and agencies try to intervene, it only prompts further identifications and other strategies for holding people together. So for instance, in 2018, Facebook started articulating takedown rules for hate speech and more. It was a long list and it was an imperfect list and didn't work too well, but they started doing it. And immediately there was a reaction. Jonathan Albright's a data scientist who asked the question, where did the lies and hate go? And Facebook enforced the rules. They went into Facebook groups. You can make a Facebook group private. Nobody comes in except the people who you invited. So if you're antagonizing the outgroup doesn't see it in a Facebook group. And people learn to share screen captures of words and propagate those because the Facebook language AI can't find pictures, it can only find language. So the group, yeah, and so forth. And so you see friendly images like this, you know, about the Facebook owner himself, who it says hates various people but loves banning conservatives, and then this propagates there. But you know, Facebook and Twitter, they both started doing things to try to make things better, and so people emigrate into other spaces. This is a post from last week on Gab that pointed out almost everything that's going viral on Twitter right now is a total lie or unverifiable. And so they go to spaces that offer more freedom of speech, where you see more racism and hatred show up. So Gab, as you may know, was where the manifesto was posted by the individual who then went out and shot people in a synagogue several years ago. And if that's not bad enough, you can, you know, if that's not free enough where you can go to Parler, where there's even fewer restrictions and no algorithms and so forth. So in other words, the group stays together, the group communicates with the group to try to get praise. And when somebody tries to intervene in that, the group gets closer and protects themselves and loves each other more. They're more special. And to further this argument that people are doing this and then trying to make friends, here's a quote from a New York Times story last January, when President Biden was inaugurated. That might have been the end of the QAnon saga, that knew President Trump would be re-inaugurated and then get rid of the pedophiles. But Ron Watkins, a QAnon booster, he wrote to people, well, we have a new president sworn in. We'll respect the Constitution. Just try to remember all the friends and happy memories we made together over the past few years. And so it's about having fun and making friends. The second major argument I'm trying to develop is that these activities are socially organized and fun. I'll explain fun and why it's in quotation marks shortly. In terms of finding social organization, one of the best examples you would find is in the case of doxing. Doxing, a term for documenting individuals and publishing their private information online. And here's an example from, not from 5 days ago, but from back during, I think this was post-president election material. Apparently some individual had gotten into fisticuffs with a Trump supporter. And somebody found out who that person was, put his name, address, phone number online, and encourages everybody to echo this, make this person forever jobless and so forth. And you see these kinds of things. It's been reported that election workers have been doxxed like this. So again, this is an attack on an individual, harassing an individual, but relies on the group of people who organize this and execute it together. This was a professor south of here at Orange Coast College, who when Trump was first elected, called it an act of terrorism. And there was all kinds of piling on, and the person had to leave her job and so forth. We hear about these things all the time. Social organization of online hate. This is a fascinating article by Udupa, who writes about online political discussions in India and talks about fun as a meta practice of extreme speech. I found this a fascinating article. Talks about online hatred in the political context as fun because people try to make it funny. They say snarky things, which is cute. That they develop memes, which tend to be humorous and so forth. They engage in these things, in the activity, for those who agree, with the positions itself is considered fun. And it's not just in India. We can see this all over the place. Last week, I found this on Gab. This is the internet's best resource for anti-Jewish memes is found on Gab, and it's easily findable. And if that's not enough for you, they'll give you a pointer also to the black memes. And you know, and here's the things you find. You get a picture of the gas chambers at Auschwitz, although they refer to them as the clothing disinfectant chambers at the camp. And that becomes then fodder for a joke. So here's a new meme, which is the clothes dryer with a special feature, a door handle on the inside, in case a Jew needs to get out. So this is supposed to be a joke for anti-Semites, and you can see the intent. This then is from the Black Meme Repository, and this is a video of a guy just beating a black woman. Just seems to be arbitrary and indiscriminatory, and indiscriminate, and it's just violence. But apparently, it's there because they think other people would enjoy it. And of course, these things get likes and so forth. The last argument, the last major argument in this work is that engaging in these behaviors and the social attention that ones get should affect one's self-perception and one's attitudes toward these various groups. So I rely here on the work called Identity Shift that my friends Gonzalez and Hancock first developed. They did some very simple experiments. They prompted people for almost no incentive at all. Just here's your $5 for being in the experiment, to go onto a blog and present yourself as though you were introverted, or present yourself as though you were extroverted. And then people took a post-test self-assessment and rated themselves as more introverted or as more extroverted, depending on the assignment. It's just that simple. It seemed to change self-perception. We did a follow-up study, and we found that confirmatory feedback from somebody else magnifies the identity shift. We just had a simple, either from a human or a robot, look at the passage somebody wrote and say, this is a very outgoing individual. They rated themselves even more extroverted. So self-presentation and feedback is very powerful in terms of starting to move the needle on your self-perceptions and your attitudes. We asked the question in a recent experiment, is digital social approval sufficient? We're looking at things like the heart or the thumbs up, like the thumbs up you gave me about the brave Ukrainians. And I'm going to fly through this and save time for questions. But very, very briefly, we created some fake news. We put it on a fake news website. We created a fake Twitter feed. And we asked people to choose a news story, to quote tweet it, and share some comment that would make other people read the story. And they did that. We saved their comments and so forth. And then, unbeknownst to them, my research team put a specific number of hearts on their retweet, either 0, 5, 10, 15, or 20. And a few days later, we had them come back and do the post test. And here's what we got, a pretty interesting three-way interaction effect, so that if it was a negative fake news story, and if it was about the opposite party's politician, then the more likes you got, the more you detested this politician. These were people that didn't exist and events that never took place. A lot of people dropped out of that study, which is a good thing, but hundreds completed it. And these are the effects we got, which is telling me that these signals of social approval, like this or like this, are enough to change your attitudes in a very negative way. So what worries me about assertions that Zelensky is a globalist puppet for Soros and the Clintons, and that Macron and Trudeau and Zelensky, they all report to the same satanic masters, is what worries me is not that it is asserted. What worries me is that it is liked by other people who will also retweet it, and that they get liked in turn for doing so. And you know, maybe this is just a nutcase out there, but this nutcase has a lot of followers, and this nutcase is an elected politician in the state of Arizona. And so this isn't going away. And we know where this kind of thing goes when it involves people in government and when it involves that many people. Maybe this is where it goes. I mean, is this a picture of somebody trying to intercede in the transfer of power, or is this somebody who's posing and taking souvenirs in order to attract attention? Is this somebody who looks like they are determined to stop the democratic process? Because this is the posting that the person put on Facebook saying, here I am inside the Capitol. I assume it's to get likes and to get attention. I don't think this is to stop the governmental process, but of course it has that effect. So it's not this meme that worries me, it's the likes that worries me, because we know where this goes as well. So I'm Joseph Walther. My grandfather was Joseph Walther. My grandmother was Fanny Walters. This was their house in Germany. And here's what they looked like. And this is my grandmother's passport from 1938 out of Germany. And so the same symbology was there. So we know where this goes. For me, it's professional, it's theoretical, and it's personal. These are the things I'm trying to develop, and that's kind of why I'm trying to develop them. There's a long way to go on this. Professor Marwick, who I'm pleased I'll be able to hear from shortly, is one of the only other people I know who's doing very interesting theoretical work to try to discover why people do this. Most of the research is on what happens when you're a victim of online hate. And Professor Marwick is brave enough to also ask the question with different answers. What prompts people to do this? I'm looking forward to hearing from her. Thank you.
Is there something to be gained studying the issues you are studying comparatively across different groups of people, genders, nations, and we were talking privately about this historically? Or would there be nothing to be gained because this you really think is a universal kind of phenomenon?
Well, I think you're asking two very good questions, but two different questions. First is it, or do we look across different groups? And I think, of course, we need to understand how these things manifest, but I have a feeling the dynamics are very generalizable. But the second question, do we look at this historically? And I would say, yes, we very badly need to do that to help discover what it is about our contemporary technology and its affordances that are changing the dynamics, potentially making it more dangerous, or potentially telling us we shouldn't worry. Maybe it's simply cathartic now, which is a remote but real possibility. So it doesn't, nobody here would give me a thumbs up for Zelensky being a bad guy, and I didn't expect you to actually, but you can do that in a hidden way online. This is something that's different. You know, you used to have to show up at a rally or say it to your friends in a bar, and now you can do it you can be part of the community and be invisible at the same time. This is different than it used to be in history. The affordances of social media, just to do a click and a like, is different than things used to be in history. And so I think it's very important to study history and the media and the way people collectivized in the past to teach us very specifically how social media are changing the equation, and if it gives us greater cause for concern. Did that answer your question?
Yes, very well.
Absolutely fantastic presentation. I think this is extremely important work, and I want to say thank you because this is difficult work to do. I was, you know, it's so just viscerally upsetting to see these things. Something I've been thinking about for a while, and I wonder if you might weigh in, is how a lot of this online hate speech, and not so much in the private forums like Stormfront, but more like Reddit trolls, people trolling, people arguing, they do it under the guise of opening discourse, right? So it seems to me that the Enlightenment ideal of a battlefield of ideas, or this Enlightenment ideal that everyone should have equal say and then we debate rationally between them, is being weaponized. I don't know if you're familiar with the term sea lioning, but it's,
I have not.
yes,
not heard.
it's it's basically when somebody continuously asks questions under the guise of good faith discourse, but are in fact being disingenuous and trying to bait their victims into being upset or feeling unsafe. So think of how a sea lion just is barking at you, but it means nothing. It's like that, but it's under the guise of intelligent conversation. So I wonder if you might just weigh in a little on how discourse and contingency and rationality, quote unquote, are being weaponized by people who are in fact only trying, they're not looking for truth. They're in fact simply trying to harm and to hurt. Thanks.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I didn't know the term sea lining. The process you described, I thought, was called faculty meetings.
That too.
But when it happens online, of course, a different story. So and to be honest with you, I don't know, because I think the question that you asked is asking about individual motives, and individual motives I'm not so sure about. You know, they exist clearly. The motive to disrupt or the interest in disrupting certainly is something to deal with. But I ask a different question. The question that I ask is, if that disruptive tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to like it, will the tree fall again? And so the question that you ask is very, very important. It's just different than the one I'm asking because I'm interested in communication as a process. Doesn't mean that's the right question. It just means I think they're somewhat different.
Certainly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
My question is I'm thinking a little bit about another line of research in which people create social media profiles and then talk about the radicalization of that profile, right? Which there was about 2019 or so, there were some highly covered experiments in either clicking on Trump or clicking on Clinton or Biden, and then seeing what happened to the information ecosystem of those accounts. And then in November, I think of last year, there was an Atlantic piece where someone just created a neutral profile and just liked everything that Facebook recommended to them, to see how long it took for that neutral account with no particular bias to become quote unquote radicalized, right?
Right.
So this is more from the point of view of the way the algorithms promote an attention economy. So I guess what I'm wondering when I'm thinking about that line of research and your line of research is there a sort of productive conversation to be had about the way that, from the platform's point of view, being a part of a network of people who are all liking each other all the time is the goal. Are there ways of distinguishing that from hate, out-group hate radicalization that could become a kind of a productive conversation between social research and platform-based social media thinking as a kind of a technocratic sphere that's oriented towards advertising dollars?
Thank you. Let me make sure I understand your question. I think you're asking me how much of this is truly spontaneous social interaction and social dynamics. How much of it is amplified through the algorithmic feeding of likes and feeding of highly emotional and intense and hateful language? Is that the question?
Yes, and to be more concrete in relation to your talk, the experiment in which you left a group of fake likes.
Yes.
The platform itself tries to, by putting things from people's feeds into other people's feeds, attempts to create emergent situations in which groups of people do what you did.
Right.
But indirected through other people liking each other, right? So there's a sort of so are there ways that your kind of knowledge about the way this motivates people concretely through free association or experimental situations relates to the way the platform creates this as an emergent effect?
Right. Now I understand the question. And my honest answer is no. And that's a big gap in my research. So clearly that's an important vector that's going on, is the algorithmic matching and promotion and amplification of highly emotional material that gets that encourages likes and engagement and reciprocally emotional language. So that's clearly a factor. But I would mention on the other side of the fence on that, an article I think in the New York Times, I think in the last 7 days, that looked at Parler or Gab, I'm not sure, and pointed out that it has no algorithms, and it doesn't promote. It leaves you free to hunt and choose and pick, and it said so. It avoids many of the ills that we associate with other social media platforms, and it concludes, but be careful what you wish for,
Right.
because it's also a gutter. So clearly, you're right. The algorithmic amplification of things sure could be making it worse. How much worse than bad is something I don't know. Thank you. Good question. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, Joe, it's really nice to meet you too. I'm so sorry I can't be there in person. I was really looking forward to meeting you. I'm a big fan of your work. And it's wonderful to see you investigating this somewhat. Well, it's a terrible research area, honestly. It's very unpleasant to conduct research in. But I wanted to ask you something, given your area of expertise, and it's something I've been mulling over for the last couple of years. So, 15, 20 years ago, if you ask people about like, why do people say hateful things on the internet, they would probably give you some sort of explanation that involved around, well, people are removed from the people on the other side of the screen, so they don't care if they hurt their feelings or not because they don't see them as real people, which is sometimes called, the online disinhibition effect, which I'm pretty skeptical of that particular theory. Then at AIR, Lisa Nakamura, maybe like 6 years ago, gave a keynote where she basically just blew my mind with the way she talked about this, because she was like, well, you're saying that given disinhibition, right? If this is true, if the idea that you're anonymous behind the screen and all of a sudden you can say whatever you want, that suddenly produces like virulent racism, anti-Semitism, and misogyny. Like there's a disconnect there, right? There's plenty of people that regardless of how anonymous they are, they would never engage in those types of things whatsoever, right? Like I can be as anonymous as I want. I'm not going to start being an anti-Semite. So I wonder what your thoughts are about that, about the sort of the affordances of computer mediated communication that do make it easier for people to say things that they wouldn't necessarily say in like quote unquote mixed company, and whether or not this reveals like a vast well of hatred that's always been there, or whether there's something about the internet that amplifies this or causes it to be more visible.
That's a great question, and I appreciate you bringing it up. And it's a complex question. Let me start by saying I think that the characterization of internet communication as anonymous is overblown and irresponsible. And in the context of hate, from the framework that I'm trying to look at things, anonymity would be your enemy, because true anonymity means nobody knows who said what. And if you're in the game to garner likes and followers, anonymity is a problem for you. Now the problem with that assertion is that in 4chan you are anonymous, and there's a lot of hate there also, and this is beyond my comprehension so far. But in the dynamics of a social network where one is trying to garner a following and relationships and signals of social approval, anonymity would be antithetical. Pseudonymity maybe, but that's another story. The other part of your question is, do people feel enabled or empowered to say horrible things online that they wouldn't say face to face? And I'm speculating. I'm making up things based on other things that I know and trying to synthesize as I go along. But I would say yes and no. We know there's a history throughout various forms of internet communication that people overestimate the amount of privacy that they have when they post. So whether this is in some academic discussion within a MOOC, or Bill Gates sending email to employees at Microsoft, people assume things are confidential, and they never will be, they never were, and they never will be. So, but they overestimate that. So I think people often believe that they're communicating with an in-group, even though it's in a very accessible public setting. But because they think they're communicating within some kind of protected space, they may feel more at liberty to say things that they might not say if they recognize what truly mixed company they were in. So that's the yes part. And the no part is that's how it's always been. So people say things in the, remember President Clinton, President Trump, quite different. Trump, he was caught making those comments on tape. He said, this is just guy talk. This is locker room talk. So there are such things as guy talk and locker room talk and barroom talk that are in secluded spaces that people acknowledge they would not have done in other settings. So to that extent, this is not new. In the hate context, I'm very impressed by the work of anthropologist Walther who has documented that there are, especially in American rural communities, there are communities where there's a unusually high degree of wife battering and violence toward women. And in these communities, there tend to be support systems among the men who engage in these behaviors that exonerate it and justify it and will tell one another that the bitch had it coming. And so, and now de Cassarity is taking that research into revenge porn, but he's really carrying an offline theory into the online realm. So the no answer to your question is there's always been this, not at scale. That's the best I can come up with by talking about other people's research, not my own.
Thank you.
Thank you.